All right, it's Wednesday night, back for a live Panther-Lair Show. First time in a while, it seems like. I feel like the last few live shows we've done have kind of gotten moved to post-game shows. The last few weeks that we've had Wednesday night shows. I think we had one 2 weeks ago. Last week, we had the live show after the North Carolina game. So that was a lot of fun, doing a post-game show after that one. We haven't had a regular Wednesday night live show in quite some time. So here we are. It's 8:30 on a Wednesday night on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, and you are hanging out with me, Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com, to talk a little Pitt sports on a Wednesday night. And obviously basketball is on the table. That's a prominent topic these days, understandably so. But we can do football and recruiting and whatever else you have on your mind. So you can put your questions there in the chat screen. It's right along your right hand bar, somewhere around there. You should see that chat screen. Post your comments, post your questions. We'll read the comments and react to them. We'll answer the questions as best we can. And we want to make sure your comments and questions get read and answered. You can always be a super chatter. Little $sign down at the bottom there. You can kick a couple bucks to the podcast, support the podcast. We appreciate that very much. And if you do that, we'll be sure to read your comments and your question. If you do it, post your comment or post your question with the super chat. I think there's an option to do that. So, you should, and then we always know what your comment is. Some people post the comment or a question and then go through and super chat it later. And I don't know what your comment or your question was. So make sure you do that. While you're here, also like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You check out the website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, and recruiting. All at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. It's right there at the bottom of the screen. Don't click that. That's not a link. That is an image. What you can do is follow those words, type those letters right into your search bar, your browser bar. Not during the live show, of course, but at another time to go get the best online Pitt coverage you're going to find, the best online community of Pitt fans you're going to find. It's pretty good place to hang out, I think, if you are a Pitt fan. It's been almost 24 hours since the end of the Louisville game last night. I still can't get over how they played in that game. I still can't get over how they dominated in that game. We have not seen Pitt play like that against a conference opponent in a long, long time. At one point in the Syracuse game earlier this season, they had a 20-point lead in the second half. That didn't hold up. They obviously beat Louisville by 21 earlier this year, but that game didn't feel quite as dominant. I think we did a live show after that game, maybe. And I remember thinking that, anytime Louisville kind of made it close, Jamarius Burton just shut the door. But Louisville was able to kind of continue not really making it close. It ends up being a win by 21 points. So it's not like they ever got all that close in that first game. But they were able to get close enough that every now and then Jamarius Burton needed to step up and make a play. Last night, he didn't even need to step up and make a play. He scored 8 points, only played 9 minutes in the second half. Like, they didn't need Jamarius Burton. They didn't need Nelly Cummings or Blake Hinson. And those guys scored some points. They just had such a total team dominance of Louisville, the likes of which we haven't seen in a long, long time. And, the records. They set the school record for the largest margin of victory in an ACC game. 34 points. Previous record was 33. Set against Clemson 9 years ago, and the first year Pitt joined the ACC. And so it's been a long time since they've had a game like this. The next biggest margin of victory in an ACC game was against Boston College a couple years after that. I want to say in the, January, February 2016. So Jamie Dixon's last year. But that was only 23 points. And so now you've got a win that is as big as any they've recorded. And it was sort of refreshing to have a game like last night after the 3 games that came before it, with Wake Forest and Miami and North Carolina all coming down to the final possession. Miami, it's a big defensive stand. Jamarius Burton just taking the ball away from Isaiah Wong. North Carolina, it's Jamarius Burton driving and drawing a foul and making 2 free throws to win 65-64. 3 wins in a row that came by a combined total of 6 points. That starts to wear on you a little bit. Emotionally, physically, and I'm just talking about the players. I'm not even talking about the fans or the people watching the games, because I know it wears on you as well to have to sit through those games and survive the end of those games, just like it does for the players. But to go out and have a game that is really never in doubt. And even, Jeff Capel talked about the first 4 minutes, heading into the under-16 timeout. And the under-16 timeout actually didn't come until the 14:51 mark. It was 5 minutes into the game, and at that point it was tied. It was 12-12. And Louisville had made 2 threes at that point. They made another long jump shot. They drove. But the thing that stood out to me, and I talked about this on the Morning Pit this morning, kind of reflecting back on the game. Even during those first 5 minutes, and Jeff Capel talked about they were defensive lapses, and they weren't playing as well defensively as he'd hoped they would, and he was worried that there was too much time off from the Carolina game to the Louisville game. Even then, they were still forcing Louisville. They were still forcing Louisville to run a lot of the shot clock off. And I don't think it was all just Louisville choosing to run the clock. That's not the worst approach to take against Pitt, a team that likes to be aggressive offensively and shoot a lot and shoot early and score as much as they can. I think Pitt was defending well. I don't think Louisville wanted to take, like I say, they made 2 3-pointers in those first 5 minutes and had another 2-pointer that was a really, I wrote it down, long jump shot. It was close enough that it almost looked like it might have been a 3. And those were late in the clock shots. Louisville had another drive that they had to pause the game. It made the drive and basket made it 4-2. Gave Louisville a 4-2 lead. I think one of their only leads in the game, I should say. They also led it 7-5, but that was it. But it was 4-2, and they had to stop and check the tape to see if the clock ran out. The shot clock. So, they were running down each possession. They were going through the shot clock. So, I still think they were defending okay. It was just a matter of Louisville was knocking down shots, and that pretty much stopped after that. Pretty much stopped after that little stretch and stopped after that media timeout. And when they came back out, actually the media timeout was at the 13:54 mark. So, it was about 6 minutes into the game. And it was 12-12, and Pitt obviously never looked back and crushed Louisville from there on out, and did it with pretty much everything that you could look to do right. They did, and there haven't been many games that we've seen or from this Pitt team where you could really say that. They had 14 turnovers, I think, which is a higher number than you would like, but at least a handful of those came late in the game when you had some unique lineups out there, both Diaz-Graham twins playing with Nelly Cummings, and it was a different kind of lineup, and maybe different combinations of players than those guys are used to or comfortable with. And so you have some miscommunications here and there. The ball gets away. I didn't think it was, turnovers were a huge problem. But if you want to find something they didn't do well last night, that's pretty much it. Because it was just that good of a game for Pitt. And obviously, I think probably one of the plays that summed it up the best, one of the plays that really kind of encapsulated how that game was going for both teams, was when Nike Subandi got a steal, took off for a fast break dunk, clanged it off the rim. Jamarius Burton grabbed the rebound, looked for someone to pass to, and then realized Subandi was just standing next to him, so he just handed it to him. Subandi stepped outside the arc and put down the 3. It was just that kind of night. It was just that kind of night. Pitt couldn't miss, and Louisville couldn't catch a break. And, you say both of those things, and certainly Louisville not catching a break almost in sort of the passive sense. But that wasn't the case. This was a case of Pitt dominating a game. And I give them a lot of credit, too. I give them a lot of credit for not... they've shown to us that they can win the close games, that they can make plays at the end to close out a tight game and win a close game. They've shown that. But it's also, I think, incredibly valuable to show that you can put your foot on another team's throat and not let them up. And I don't, I don't think they've been 100% doing that this season. The Syracuse game, Syracuse got way back into that, far closer than it ever should have been. But to do it last night, I think it was incredibly important for this team and their confidence and their mindset going forward. I really do. And I'll say this too. We've talked a lot about the assist stats, 23 assists on 28 baskets, or 28 made field goals. For Pitt to continue playing that way throughout the game, even when the game was a 20, 30-point game for, the better part of, the final 22, 24 minutes or so, to continue sharing the ball, continue passing the ball, continue emphasizing getting the ball to your teammates, and not just settling into screwing around, trying to drive, take your guy off the dribble every time. I think that says something too. I think it says something about this team and their approach and their maturity. I think it comes from, the veteran leadership. I think it comes from the makeup of the roster and the character of the players on the team. And that's how they approached it. And they were able to keep playing that way regardless of the circumstances of the game, which I think is a pretty tremendous credit to the players. I think it's a pretty tremendous credit to Jeff Capel and his staff. Everything was working last night. And the reality is, everything's been working more often than not for this team all season. And if not everything's been working, a whole lot of things have been working for this team more often than not throughout the season. And they only seem to be getting better. Pitt clinched a winning record last night with that win. First winning record in 7 years. 2015-16 season was the last time Pitt had a winning record. They were 21-12 that year, Jamie Dixon's final season. I think they went 9-9, I think, in the ACC. They've eclipsed that ACC record with 10 wins already through 13 games. And they seem well on their way. They've clinched a winning record, and they seem well on their way to blowing past 20 wins overall, when they've already got 17 victories in the bank, 7 more regular season games to play. Who knows how many in the ACC tournament and whatever the NCAA tournament might bring. We're at the point now where I don't think we need to be too concerned about bracketology anymore. No, I shouldn't say that. We should and we will continue to be concerned about bracketology for this Pitt team, but it'll be more about what seed they get rather than the question of whether or not they're making the NCAA tournament. I don't say that to mean, I just think their resume is so good they can't possibly be left out. I say that to mean that I truly do believe in this team taking care of business over the course of the next 7 regular season games. I don't think they're going to go 7-0. That would be pretty remarkable if they did. Obviously, if they shoot and play like they did last night, they're going to go 7-0. But 6-1, 5-2 at the worst, get you to 15-16 conference wins, get you to 22-23 overall wins, and get you in the NCAA tournament. Get you a double bye in the ACC tournament, and get you a bid in the NCAA tournament. Possibly has you winning the conference. That's not out of the realm of possibility at all. If you win 15-16 games, like 15-5, 16-4 might win the ACC this year, regular season title. And if you win the ACC regular season title with a 15-5 or 16-4 record in conference play, 23-24 wins in overall, you're getting in no matter what happens in Greensboro. So Pitt, for all intents and purposes, is in the NCAA tournament. I don't see this team enduring the kind of collapse it would take to keep them out. That doesn't mean that it's going to be easy. Doesn't mean that they can just sleepwalk through any of these games. And certainly this game at Florida State on Saturday is going to be a great test to start off with. But I think what they showed last night is that they have the wherewithal and the fortitude to not sleepwalk through games. That would have been a game to do it. You're coming off a break. You won 3 close games against really good teams. You're playing the worst team in the ACC, one of the worst teams in college basketball. Last night would have been the night to sleepwalk through a game. And instead they scored 91. Instead they got 41 points off the bench. Instead they out-rebounded a team. Instead they shared the ball so well they had 23 assists on 28 made baskets. They didn't sleepwalk through that. they approached it with the same amount of urgency and intensity and energy that they approached the game at Carolina a week earlier, or last week, I should say. And that says a lot about this team. It says a lot about their makeup, because they've now shown they can persevere in a variety of situations over the last couple of weeks. And I think they're just going to keep getting better. It's a pretty remarkable thing to see right now. I got to say, as that sort of slow, steady progression of continuing to buy into, buy into this team, as people I think have continually, probably since mid-December, maybe dating back to the Northwestern game, sort of been trying to figure out whether they want to believe in this team, whether they believe this actually is a good team. And as my good friend, your good friend DT Pitt said on the boards after the game last night, this is a pretty darn good team. And I think that's accurate. I think the things that they're lacking, they're able to make up for. I think they're still liable to get out rebounded by a team. I think they're still vulnerable to a cold shooting stretch, which is going to do in most teams. If most teams go on a cold drought, a shooting drought, or a scoring drought, I should say, they're gonna run into some problems. They're gonna have a tough game. That goes for anyone. But this team, as much as any we've seen at Pitt in a long time, can shoot its way out of droughts and shoot its way out of slumps. And they have guys who don't necessarily, if the outside shots aren't falling, Nelly Cummings can make a play. Jamarius Burton can make a play. Nike Sabandi can make a play. And this is with a couple of games now of Blake Hinson not really playing at the highest level he's capable of playing. Once you get him going again, and I talked about this on the Morning Pit probably yesterday or the day before, I don't know, I lose track of these things. You're always going to be able to rely on Jamarius Burton making plays and scoring for this team. But I think you have that as a reliable, and you're going to get somebody else. It might be Nelly Cummings like it was in North Carolina. It might be Greg Elliott. It might be Blake Hinson. It might be Nike Sabandi. You're going to get somebody else. Where you really run into trouble when you face this team is when there's a third guy going as well. Like if Burton's getting his, Cummings is scoring, and now Hinson or Elliott start knocking down shots from outside, you're really screwed. I mean, you're in a world of trouble at that point, because there's just too much. There's too many weapons. And that, I think, that preponderance of weapons, that multitude of ways in which they can attack you. And Kenny Payne talked about this last night. The Louisville coach talked about how, if you stop this, they can do that. And if you stop that, they can do that. And if they stop that, they can do that. And if you stop that, he went on, and their ability to do that, I think, offsets what they might give up on the, on the rebounding, which is, I think, this team's biggest vulnerability is on the glass. Now, again, they out-rebounded Louisville, did a decent job rebounding against Miami. Got eaten up pretty good against North Carolina, but I think that's going to happen. You're going to run into those kinds of matchups. This team has ways to get around those matchups, deal with those matchups, and survive those matchups when an opponent is rebounding really well. It's a fun team to watch. And it's a successful team. It's a team that's winning a lot. They're scoring a lot of points, and they seem to be having a lot of fun doing it, which makes it fun to watch, which we haven't seen in quite some time. Let's see what's going on in the chat here. It seems like everybody's tuning in and posting comments and questions. I'm going to jump into that in a second. And again, you can post your comments and questions about basketball stuff, football stuff, recruiting stuff, whatever's on your mind tonight. This is sort of like a Pitt talk show, is what I always say. It's kind of like, you might get it on the radio, but it's online, obviously. You listen to it, or you listen to it as a podcast later in the week, and you don't get to actually hear your voice. You just post your comments or your questions, and I read them, and we have that kind of interaction back and forth. So it's a little bit like a talk show, a call-in talk show is kind of how I look at it, but all the topics just are open. The floor is open for you, whatever you want to talk about Pitt-related. I mean, I guess if you want to talk about things that are not Pitt related, but that doesn't seem very fun for most people. So let's keep it to the Pitt related stuff: football, basketball, recruiting, whatever's on your mind. And I'll tell you who really likes talking about Pitt sports is our good friend Chris Gates. I don't know why I can't say that tonight. The Wednesday live show, of course, as always, is sponsored by Chris Gates Fitness. Chris is an online fitness coach from Pittsburgh. He works with people all over the world to create customized fitness and nutrition programs that work. He's also a huge Pitt fan, and he loves supporting the Wednesday live show every week. Now, once you're done listening to the Panther-Lair Show tonight, or if you listen to a podcast later in the week of this, head over and find Chris's podcast. Chris Gates does a great podcast. He publishes a brand new episode every week where he answers listener questions on fitness and nutrition, and he dives in deep on topics to help you put together the right routine to see progress. You go to any podcast platform that you choose and search Chris Gates Fitness, Chris, C-H-R-I-S, Gates, G-A-T-E-S, Fitness, on any podcast platform you're going to find it, or you can go to his website, chrisgatesfitness.com/podcast, for links to listen and subscribe. This week is a new episode that Chris just released yesterday, and it's great. It's a listener Q&A on protein timing, why your weight fluctuates, and how long to rest between sets, plus other topics. Again, it's listener driven with Q&A, which, like I said, is what we like to do here as well. So Chris is a really smart guy. He knows a lot about health and fitness and nutrition, and he's a huge Pitt fan, so you should go check him out, chrisgatesfitness.com. Listen to his podcast right after you get done listening to this podcast. All right, let's get out to the comments and questions. John Marzullo starts us off, says, Chris, does this prove experience is king these days in college basketball? That's a really, really good question. No, it doesn't prove it. It doesn't prove that experience is king. I think there are two things that define this team. And it's two things we've talked about that was sort of the design of this team, how Jeff Capel put this team together, what he was looking for, and how he built this team in the offseason. And there's two things that define this team. And one is the experience, the veteran guards. I mean, they loaded up this offseason with veteran guards. They returned Jamarius Burton and Nike Sabandi, and they added Nelly Cummings and Greg Elliott and I mean, Blake Hinson, more of a forward, a wing, but they added the veteran guards so that the backcourt was loaded with 5th and 6th year players. And so they did that. That's the experience part that you're talking about. But they also really emphasized shooting. You know, Blake Hinson and Greg Elliott are shooters. Shooters that Pitt hasn't had, shooters the likes of which Pitt hasn't had since going back to guys like Ashton Gibbs or Ronald Ramon. Like, they haven't had guys who can shoot like this. I mean, no disrespect to, Ryan Murphy. They haven't had shooters like, or Ethiel Horton, who was supposed to be a great 3-point shooter as well. They haven't had guys like Elliott and Hinson who shoot a high percentage, and even Cummings to a certain extent, Nelly Cummings. But Elliott and Hinson shoot a strong percentage, and they shoot a lot. And that's the thing that has struck me with Elliott and Hinson and Cummings and Sabandi and Santos. Going back to, we watched an open practice before the season started. They let some media come in and we watched it. And one of the things I wrote about after that practice was this team has guys who can shoot and guys who will shoot. Because one of the most remarkable things was not only was Pitt one of the worst 3-point shooting teams in the ACC last season in terms of field goal percentage from outside the arc, but they were also near the bottom in attempts. Not only did they, it's not just that they didn't make many threes, they didn't even try many threes. It wasn't a threat. And so when we talked all offseason about how they needed to bring in shooters to try to draw attention away from John Huguley, because it was too easy to defend Pitt last year, that Huguley was the main threat, the only threat, because there was no threat outside. So if Huguley got the ball, you just double-teamed and triple-teamed and did whatever you want because you weren't worried about him kicking it back out because there was nobody out there to be afraid of. And so that was one of the points of emphasis this offseason. Excuse me. This offseason was to get shooters so that when Huguley got the ball inside, if you came down and doubled or tripled, he had guys to kick it out to. Guys who could make the shots. Guys who could drain threes. And then it would become less less ideal to try and double team or triple team John Huguley. You had to stay out and guard the perimeter, and then Huguley would get more favorable matchups inside. This was the plan. Now, obviously, that plan changes when they don't have John Huguley, but you still got all these shooters. And you've got these guys who, I said it from the time I watched that open practice, if you don't close out quick enough, if you're a step too late on closing out, they're going to shoot. Their first thought, their first impulse is put up the shot. And I think that's notable because not only do they make the shots, but they have quick triggers and they want the ball and they want to shoot. And if they miss one, they want it again the next time because they want to fire up another one. And if they make one, they want it again the next time because they want to fire up another one. Elliott, Hinson, Cummings, Sabandi, Santos, to varying degrees are willing and eager shooters who can knock down those 3-point shots. And that has had a immeasurable impact. Well, it's probably not immeasurable. You can absolutely quantify it, but it's had a huge impact on this team's success, on their style of play, on how they've done everything so far this season. And so it's really the combination of those two factors of having the veteran guards with experience and then having the shooters, and there's almost sort of a tangible and intangible combination there of the intangible of that veteran, experience and the tangible of these dudes can shoot 38, 39%, 40%, whatever, and they're going to fire up a bunch of threes. And you have and the connectivity of this team as well. And Jeff Capel's talked about it so much. I've talked about it a number of times when I talk about how this team is really likable, is that it seems like they genuinely enjoy playing with each other. Now, everybody's going to enjoy playing with their teammates when they're winning a bunch of games. Last year's team, did they lose because they, didn't care about playing together? Or did they look like they didn't care about playing together because they were losing? It's probably a chicken and egg. You decide which way you want, what narrative you want to pursue on that front. But I do think when Jeff Capel talks about things like having, convenient amnesia, talking about guys firing each other up, being great teammates, supporting each other, they want to play for each other, they want to win for their teammates. They know that it doesn't matter if it's them or a different teammate making a basket. The points all count for Pitt, and that's the most important thing. I think there is some value in that, and I think it has helped this team improve throughout the course of the season and get better, particularly if they had that rough stretch. It would have been easy after you start 1-3 to really kind of pack it in, but they didn't. They keep battling, and they kept battling, and they continue to improve. And so I think there's a lot of things that go into it. Is experience the most important characteristic in college basketball? I can't say that. Shooting might be. But I don't know if experience is, but it is hugely valuable. And so that's why, the transfer portal is going to continue to have a huge impact on college basketball because you can go out and get that veteran guard. You can go out and get that veteran center or that veteran forward, whoever, that guy with a lot of experience who's, maybe he's been at the mid-major level, but he's been in the NCAA tournament. He's played against high major teams like a Nelly Cummings. And you can go get that guy and bring him in because he fits what your team needs for that given season. And it might be a one-year rental. It might be a one-and-done guy who's only got a year of eligibility left, but he fits what your team needs right now. And so you go get him because he can help you win right now. You try to find that balance between the portal guys and the high school guys to try and build for longevity, but also try to win right now. And that's why that's why all these coaches, basketball and football, get paid the big bucks, because it's an incredible balance to strike, but it's one you absolutely have to pursue and target and try to capture if you're going to win in college athletics right now. You need to find that balance of recruiting and developing the guys that you want to bring in out of high school, balancing that with going and get transfers, even just one-year transfers who can help you right now and kind of fill out your roster. Goofer Woofer, however you want to say it, says buying a team is king. Yeah, it was a good night. It's been a good week for teams for coaches that bought their teams this year. Pitt beat Louisville, Wake Forest beat North Carolina, and Miami crushed Duke on Monday night. So all of Jim Boeheim's teams that bought, programs that bought teams, they all responded to his comments with a lot of success. So, what do? You buy a team, I guess you end up winning a bunch of games. But, I wasted a lot of oxygen on Jim Boeheim and Jeff Capel and NIL and all that stuff probably on Tuesday. I don't think we need to revisit now. If you have a question about NIL stuff or the Boeheim comments, I'll talk about it, but I'll save that for the questions if anybody wants to ask. Peninsula P says, might be getting ahead of myself, but I think this team can make a Final Four depending on matchups. So, the thing they have, what they're always, and what's always going to be a strength for them is that shooting. If you can shoot and score like Pitt can, and it is the variety of weapons that they have, the versatility of the weapons that they have, that Elliott and Hinson can knock down threes, Cummings can knock down some threes. Burton can make a shot from outside, but he's often going to drive and either pull up jumper, get to the basket, or draw a foul. They can attack you in a bunch of different ways. The only thing that's really missing from their offensive arsenal is posting up, interior passes and letting a guy make a move on the inside. And they even did that a little bit against Louisville. I had 3 or 4 of those that I can recall, passes into the interior, with Federico. And that's the only thing that's really missing from the offensive arsenal for this team. And the reality is, you need to defend, you need to rebound, but brother, you got to score. And this team can score. They can put up points and never really be out of a game. And I think as you look around college basketball, you don't say, boy, there's just these obvious teams they would never have a chance against. Maybe they would run into a team maybe they would run into a team that could score on them that they couldn't keep up with. And they'd lose a game like 79-75 or something like that, or 82-81 or 82-80 or something. But they should be able to score on most teams they face. They just, so that's going to give them a chance on any given night. Are they going to make it to the Final Four? No. I think we could probably bet on no. But again, that's going to give them a chance in almost every game, being able to score like that. So could they get on a run in March? Sure. Absolutely they can. I think there's a lot of teams that are capable of getting on a run in March, and I would say Pitt is one of them. Chevy Troutman, who I doubt is Chevy Troutman, says, Chris, what do you think the opening spread would be if Louisville played the black shirt wheelchair team from halftime last night? I'm glad you specified the guys in the black shirts, because there was a wheelchair basketball game played at halftime last night, and it was not a fair fight. At all. The team in the black shirts were all like grown men, older guys, some of them pretty old. And the team in the blue shirts were all like young kids. I was like, what is this game? Like, they're playing the Major League versus Minor League or something? Is the varsity playing the JV? You couldn't find like real opponents to play each other? Come on. They looked like a bunch of dudes in their 40s and 50s playing against a bunch of kids in like, under 20. And I think there's a bit of a athleticism neutralization when it comes to playing in a wheelchair. It just didn't look like a fair fight. Kids had no idea how to shoot. They were way off on the basket. The guys in the black shirts were pretty comfortable out there. As far as who would, that's as much I'll say about that. The Sticky Bandit says, if we win next game convincingly, I think we'll come in with a nice 24 ranking in the country. Yeah, I'll notice when Pitt gets into the rankings. I'm really not too concerned about it. I'll notice it. We might even write an article about it because it'll be the first time, and who knows how long. I better start researching that, because you're right, that's a real possibility probably next week. But I just, they've got the 7 losses. They have the loss of Florida State. Maybe that's holding teams back. But yeah, if they go to Florida State and hand another beat down, as you would think they should against Florida State, then I would have to imagine they'll climb into the rankings. Stinky Bandits also says, football-wise, I've been wondering who will be the number one receiver next year. Jared Wayne, I guess in place of Jared Wayne. Football-wise, I've been wondering who will be the number one receiver next year. Jared Wayne not getting accepted to the combine seems like he made a mistake. On the topic of Jared Wayne, I don't know. I don't know if he made a mistake or not. I guess if he came back, he could maybe add some things to his game. I don't know. I'm not sure how much. I don't want to say how much more higher of a ceiling he had that he could have reached, but maybe he could have done some more things, added some more sort of routes to his game, and showed that he could play in even more ways than he already did. I kind of feel like he reached a bit of a pinnacle with a 1,000-yard season last year. I think if he had come back, it would have been because he just enjoyed it and wanted to do it. Otherwise, it probably does make sense for him to go. I don't know if I'm too surprised that he didn't get invited to the combine. He's not one of the top receivers in the draft, but I think he'll have a chance to make some money in the NFL, stick around for a while. As far as Pitt's top receiver next year, I'm kind of putting my money on Konate Mumfield. Excuse me. I think he'll lead the team in receptions, is my guess. Probably receiving yards as well. I think they really need to get him more involved and do more different things with him. I had some interesting stats probably a week or two ago on Panther-Lair.com about how Konate Mumfield was used at Akron when he had a freshman All-America season, and how he was used at Pitt this past year. And one of the biggest things that stood out was the medium range passes, 10 to 19 yards downfield. He saw a lot of those at Akron. He was targeted a lot there. He caught a lot there. He put up a lot of his production in that range. At Pitt, he did not see nearly as high a percentage of his throws in that 10 to 19 yard range. And I think that's probably what needs to be emphasized with him this year. I don't know if he's going to be a big downfield threat. I think they'll keep trying to use him on screens and things like that. But I think mid-range passes, medium distance passes, is where you probably need to try and work Konate Mumfield more than they did last year. I think that's where he needs to really be utilized. And I think he can flourish in that role. So it's going to be interesting to see what his usage looks like this year. With second year working with Frank Signetti, first year with a new quarterback. But I think that's probably what they need to do. And if they do, I think he can really, flourish and have a really good season. Peninsula P says, what NCAA tournament seed do you think Pitt would receive if they won the ACC regular season and ACC tournament? No worse than a 3. Right? Potentially a 2. If they were to keep winning, right? And let's say, I don't know. I'm not going to even let's say they get to 25 wins or something like that and win both titles. Like I say, no worse than a 3 and probably a 2, I would think, with that kind of accomplishment and that kind of success. Let's see. Bring the chat screen back up. I'm scrolling down. A lot of jokesters out here. Peninsula P says, I'm intrigued by the wide receiver transfer from Florida. Dejon Reynolds. I'm intrigued by him as well. He really didn't get many opportunities at Florida. He really had one game where he got an opportunity or got a lot of opportunities. That was the Vanderbilt game, and he put up a career game. I think he had 8 catches for 165 and 2 touchdowns, something like that. He had a huge game. Now, a big part of that was he had a 75-yard touchdown reception in the fourth quarter, but he put up production because he got opportunities and he put up the production. And so I think it'll be interesting to see what he does with the opportunities. I think Mumfield and Bub Means are going to be your top 2 receivers, but you're going to need guys to step in after that. And I think Dejon Reynolds is one of the possibilities. I think some of the freshmen who are coming in are possibilities. There's sort of these middle recruiting classes in here of, Miles Alston and Jay Wabuko and Addison Copeland. I don't know what you're going to get out of those guys. I'm not sure what those guys are going to provide this season. But I think you could see a freshman or two, Lamar Seymour or Kenny Johnson, get out on the field and play a decent amount and maybe be one of the top 4 receivers on the team in terms of receptions by the time of the end of the season. I think that's very much a possibility. Reynolds is going to be in that mix. I think he could be the third receiver behind, or along with, I should say, Means and Mumfield, and see a lot of opportunities, see a lot of passes his way, and show what he can actually do. If he can back up that production that he had in the Vanderbilt game and do it with a season's worth of targets and opportunities. Pittsburgh Sports All the Time says, just a quick question. I know he's out for the rest of the season, but what is the status of John Huguley for next season? I mean, I expect him to be back, I guess. I mean, I think that's the expectation right now. They still list him. This is the flip card from last night's game, Pitt, Louisville. You see the little Louisville logo, Pitt, and the date, February 7, 2023. So this is from last night, and they give us, these flip cards. I think you can probably get them at the game too. It's just rosters. And the Pitt roster, you can see, where is it? Number 4, John Huguley, right there. Right? So they still list him on the roster. He's still on the official Pitt website. He's not at the games. At least not sitting on the bench. If he's sitting out there in the crowd somewhere, I haven't seen him. But there's been no indication that he has any plan or there's any expectation that he's going to do anything other than return to Pitt next season. It's obviously he's going through a lot. It's obvious he's going through a lot personally, and in that regard, you feel for him, and you hope he can sort out whatever it is that he's struggling to sort out. As far as basketball, you hope he can sort out his personal life to the point where he can return and play basketball for Pitt next season. I think he'd be a welcome addition. He's a different kind of player than the guys they have, and I think you can be really optimistic and really bullish on Federico and the Diaz-Graham twins. I think you can be excited about those guys and also be excited about the possibility of John Huguley returning and getting back on the court for this team. I think both things are possible and both things make a lot of sense because I think he could help make the team better if he's playing at the level he played last year. You know what I mean? And earlier in his career, certainly last year would be the one that's the big season that he had. So right now, until we hear otherwise, the expectation is that he'll be back. Will Z says, screen jumped. Hold on. Will Z says, hey, Chris, starting to see the bracket projections for Pitt if they make the tournament, seeing a Michigan State matchup. I'd hate to match up against Izzo, but think the guards could do well. I think there'll be a couple things that you look at. And I can't sit here and say that I know what Michigan State's roster looks like right now, so you can tell me if they fit this. I think whoever you match up with, you're going to immediately look at how they are on the offensive glass. You know what I mean? Are they a good offensive rebounding team, and how are they defending the three-point shot? I think if Pitt could get a draw that has them potentially on a path to play teams that don't necessarily dominate on the offensive boards and don't necessarily defend the three all that well, they can go on a real run. You know what I mean? Is that Michigan State? I don't know. I haven't looked ahead to scout Michigan State just yet. But if they end up in a matchup anywhere along the line, and it's against a team that does get on the offensive glass, and a team that does defend the three well, they're going to struggle. It's going to be a tough game. And I think those are probably the two biggest factors I would look at, the two biggest signifiers of trying to determine whether it's a good game for Pitt, a good matchup for Pitt, or a difficult one they're going to struggle in. So it's that's what I would look at with any team that they could potentially end up against is, I would look at those two factors just right off the bat. how do they do? And those are things you can look in the box scores, look in the stat line and see. How are they on offensive rebounds? What's their offensive rebound percentage? And how are they in defending the three? And that's going to probably give you an indication of how they'll do against Pitt. Will says, this is not Will Z, this is a different Will. Will says, I'll be interested in what shakes down with the portal this spring. We need a tight end and maybe one more seasoned interior defensive lineman to round out the class, and some current players will definitely leave. Yeah, I think they'll have some... I think they'll have some more transfers depart. I don't think there's any question about that. That's inevitably going to be the case. I think there'll be another round of transfers, both departures and additions after spring camp. I don't know about another interior defensive lineman, though. I mean, you've got the three seniors coming back, Tyler Bentley and Devin Danielson and David Green. And then you've got young players like an Elliott Donald or a Sean Fitzsimmons that even a DeAndre Jules, who's a little bit older, but still, relatively inexperienced. And I think they want those guys to be ready to sort of step in. Kind of like the situation at defensive end. I think if you bring in another transfer there, and an older player who's going to take away any potential reps from those younger guys, reps those younger guys might see, then you start running the risk of maybe one of those younger guys leaving. And I don't think Elliott Donald's going to transfer. I don't think Sean Fitzsimmons is going to transfer. But it's time for those guys, for that next wave of defensive linemen, both at end and tackle, to start stepping in and getting more of those snaps and more of that playing time and more experience on the field for this year and for the future. And so I think you go into the season, I don't think you necessarily need another defensive tackle. I think you go with Bentley and Danielson and Green, and then you get Elliott Donald out there and you get Sean Fitzsimmons out there, and you see who kind of fills out your four-man rotation. I do think they need another playmaking defensive tackle. I think it's going to be tough for them to find one in the transfer portal unless there's some guy lurking out there, at an FCS school or something. If they can find like a Jared Verse type of guy, kid who was at Albany and went to Florida State and had a great season this past year. If they can find a guy like that hiding in an FCS school somewhere that nobody else seems to know about, maybe they could grab him. But otherwise, I think if they're going to have another playmaking defensive tackle, it's going to have to come from the ranks of guys they already have. It's going to have to come from the roster that's currently in place, guys they've recruited and developed. I think that's probably it. So I can't really see them adding there. What was the other position you said? A tight end. I mean, I think Gavin Bartholomew. I think they still have some optimism about Dylan Devaney. I forget how to pronounce it. The kid who transferred from Georgia Tech and never played because he was hurt. I think Carter Johnson is still back. And then, you have some of these younger guys like a Jake Renda or Cole Mitchell. I mean, you've recruited these guys. You brought these guys in. You're going to need them to start contributing. You're going to need them to start playing bigger roles as soon as this year. So I could see them kicking the tires on the transfer tight end, but I don't see them making it a priority. I'm not sure what would be a priority, probably wide receiver. But, maybe, I don't know. I don't know what else I would really say would be a huge priority. Another offensive lineman, you can always use those if you can get one. But probably another wide receiver or two would be the priorities in the transfer portal. And then possibly a defensive back, maybe. You can always use another one of those. They lost a couple of safeties this offseason, but kind of like what they have coming back. So we'll see what they end up doing. But yeah, I think there'll be another round of departures and additions this offseason, or after spring camp, I should say. Sticky Bandit says, very interested in what the basketball team will look like next year and who will come back. That's a big... because Cummings can't come back. Burton can't come back. Sabandi can't come back. Elliott can't come back. There's four guys that you're not going to have next year. And so you've already got those guys gone. Now you're bringing in a couple of really good young guards in Jalen Lowe and Carlton Carrington. You're bringing in a good wing in Marlon Barnes, excuse me. And you've obviously got these three bigs coming back. You've got Nate Santos coming back. Blake Hinson has eligibility remaining. I think you assume and hope he'll come back. And then there's the two big question marks. And there are more comments here about this where Pat O says, I'll be shocked if Dior Johnson and John Huguley are both on the roster next season. Peninsula P says, if Dior and Huguley return, I think Pitt will be a preseason top 25 team. Will says, Dior maybe, Huguley, I don't see him transferring. Pitt has had his back through a lot. Peninsula P says, why would Dior transfer? You guys are all talking about this. I don't know what's going to happen right there, but Huguley's still listed on the roster. He's still a part of it. Dior Johnson is still listed on the roster. He's still a part of it. He's still at the games. Dior's at the games and getting fired up and seems to be really enjoying this experience with his teammates at Pitt. I think right now the assumption and the expectation is both guys will be here and on the roster next season. I always thought there was a limited time, a limited shelf life on how long Dior Johnson would be at Pitt. When his legal issues popped up last fall, I started to think he might never play a game for Pitt. You know what I mean? For a while, I thought it would only be one season. Now he might not even play a game for Pitt. Seeing him and his interactions and how he's carried himself and how he's been a part of the team, ever since he returned to the team after his suspension ended, I'm thinking there's a pretty good chance he's back next year. I think he sees how much fun Pitt is having and how successful Pitt is, and you sort of get the sense that he wants to be a part of that. It looks like he wants to be a part of it. And so if you have Johnson plus the two incoming freshman guards, and you have, if you could get Hinson to stay, you bring in Barnes, you have Santos back, you have the three bigs, you've got what could be a pretty solid team again. And maybe the guys who will be on the team next year picked up a little bit on what the guys on the team this year did in terms of chemistry, in terms of leadership, in terms of mindset and mentality and approach and urgency and energy and all those things, chemistry and all those things that have defined this year's team and made this year's team so successful. And they, maybe they pass it on and kind of carry that tradition forward and make it a tradition. Which would, I think, lead to a lot of success for Pitt because they're really talented players. And that group of guys I just ran down, I think there's some really talented guards. I think the growth we've seen out of Federico and the Diaz-Graham twins is really incredibly positive for the future and should make you really hopeful for the future. And you kind of put that all together and you say, boy, they might have a pretty decent team next year. Might not be as good as this year's team. Might not shoot as well. But that's what the transfer portal is for, right? Maybe you go out and find another one or two really good shooting wings and you start linking together a couple of good seasons. It's a very real possibility. All right. Scrolling down here. See what else people have to say. Jim Hicks says, if Pitt loses to Florida State, we won't see the top 25 until we hit the Elite Eight, which I think we can. Yeah, I mean, if Pitt loses to Florida State, you're right. They won't get ranked again, and it doesn't matter because I think they'll still be on track for the goals that they want to accomplish. I think they'll still have a very good shot at making the NCAA tournament, and I think they can still play well enough to make noise in both postseason tournaments, the ACC tournament and the NCAA tournament. Talk is Pitt says, for once, I'm concerned about the defense for the football team, especially when it comes to the linebacker room. How do you think the defense will fare this season? Will Z replies to him, says, I think Kamara, Simon, and DeShields will improve a lot. None will be as good as Servassier, Dennis, but the group as a whole should get better. Let's see. As far as Pitt with the defense overall, I kind of think about Pitt's defense at this point the way I think about Pitt's defensive recruiting, that this coaching staff has enough of a track record and they've been successful enough for a long enough period of time that I'm not just automatically deferring to them or just automatically giving the benefit of the doubt or blindly trusting them, but I'm pretty sure they're going to be able to put together a strong group. I think this year's defense, maybe more than the past few years, might take a little while to kind of get itself together. I think where they're looking at a few positions where they're going to be transitioning to younger players. They're going to get younger at defensive end. They're going to get younger at safety. I think at some of those spots, they could have some vulnerabilities, particularly early in the season. But I think there's enough talent in this group, enough talent at those positions, enough talent throughout the defense. I think they've recruited well enough on defense that that when those guys kind of figure out what they're doing and get comfortable on the field, they're going to be playmakers. I think they're going to be really good. A guy like Deion Hayes, who's not even young anymore, or a guy like Sam Okunlola, or a guy like Nakai Johnson. I mean, these guys can play. And, Okunlola, I think, is going to be really good as soon as this year. He's a name that I keep hearing. It keeps coming up. It kept coming up last spring when he arrived early as a January enrolling freshman. And it just keeps coming up over and over again. He got hurt, and that's probably the biggest reason he didn't get on the field this season, or at least enough to burn his red shirt. But he, I think, is going to be really good. And it just might take a little time for him to get there. I think the same thing at safety. We saw Javon McIntyre make some big plays this season, stepping in at boundary safety for Brandon Hill. I see no reason why he won't continue that into the new year or into the new season. But he might have some youthful mistakes as well, some gaffes of inexperience. And so you'll have that. But I think on the whole, it's still going to be a really talented defense, a really athletic defense, a defense with good speed. I think the linebackers will be good. I think all the guys that we talk about, like Bengali Kamara and Solomon DeShields in particular, and even Shane Simon in his first year in the defense, they all got a ton of experience last year. They all played 13 games last year and played a lot of snaps and saw what it's like on the field, learned what it's like to be on the field in a college football game and make plays and what they have to do in order to win games. And now they're bringing all that experience back. I don't know if any individual player is going to be as good as Servassier Dennis. I think Bengali Kamara will live up to my preseason expectations from a year ago when I thought he would be a stat stuffer with interceptions and forced fumbles and fumble recoveries and sacks and TFLs and total tackles. I think he's going to be all over the field this year, and I think he's going to be a huge impact player for Pitt. I'll go back to my prediction from last year that he'll score multiple defensive touchdowns in 2023. I think he's going to be really, really good. I think he's a future NFL player. I think DeShields is a great athlete as well at outside linebacker. I think getting Shane Simon back was big for this group as an experienced linebacker to come back and help lead the group. I think Brandon George redshirting, giving him potentially 2 more years with this defense is big. They're going to need depth players to step up. They're going to need some younger players to step up and fill out the 2 deep. But on the whole, I really like this group of linebackers. I thought they were playing really well from about mid-season on, and probably from earlier than that. Not without their mistakes throughout the season, but pretty good year from the linebackers, and I think they'll be even better this year. So, front to back, I think they've recruited defense really well. I think they've shown that they can coach and develop defensive players really well, and I don't see any reason why that'll fade in 2023. I think they're going to keep that up and keep going as, even if they don't have best in the ACC stats all year, I think by the end of the season, they'll probably be playing like one of the best defenses in the conference again, which is sort of a position they've carved out for themselves over the past few seasons. All right, we made it about an hour here. I think that's always the target time that we shoot for. I think are we over an hour? Yeah, somewhere around. Yeah, a little bit over an hour. So we will call it there. But thanks to everybody who tuned in tonight. It's been a lot of fun, as always, during the live stream. I really enjoy everybody who comes in and shares some comments and questions. It's fun to chat. With everybody. I also appreciate everybody who likes the video, subscribes to the YouTube channel. Making sure you do those things. Click the like button and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Don't forget the Morning Pit every morning, Monday through Friday, right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I don't know, 15, 20, 25 minutes of Pitt talk to get you started on your day. We're going to talk Pitt football tomorrow, so make sure you check that out. Although if you're listening to this podcast at some point during the day on Thursday, we'll be talking about it today. And if you're listening to this podcast on Friday, we talked about it yesterday. It's very confusing to keep up on which days we're talking about. But on the Thursday morning Pitt, we're going to have some football talk. Friday morning Pitt, we'll get you ready for Pitt, Florida State. That's a big one for the Panthers this weekend as they look to extend their winning streak to 5. I think they should, but we'll talk about that, like I say, on the Friday morning Pitt. In the meantime, stay tuned to Panther-Lair.com, the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, Panther-Lair.com. Thanks again for tuning in tonight or listening to the podcast later in the week. I appreciate it. Make sure you check out ChrisGatesFitness.com. Thanks to him for his support. And have a great Wednesday night. We made it over hump day. We're heading into the home stretch of the week. I hope it's been a good week for you so far. I hope you have a good week coming up. Thanks again, and we will talk to you on Thursday for the morning Pit right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.